Woman! Whoa, man! Whoa, man!
You alright, everyone? We are back once again with another podcast episode. I'm kind of shocked in myself that I'm keeping to my 2-week timeline. This week we're talking with a beautiful man called Jason Wood, who suffers from an eating disorder called orthorexia, which is an addiction to healthy, clean eating. And I know that sounds like quite the juxtaposition in regards to healthy eating and eating disorders, but stick with me because it is such an interesting eating disorder to think about and such a beautiful conversation that we both had together. You're going to pick up our conversation where I've just kind of asked Jason if you could just explain a little bit more about his orthorexia, and then we just kind of get into issues that surround eating disorders, social media, how men can start to open up more in regards to talking more about eating disorders, wrapping their head around how social media can affect them in regard to reflecting on themselves and how that can maybe manifest into an eating disorder. It's a beautiful conversation. It's a great conversation. Jason is a beautiful guy, as I've mentioned. He has a book called Starving for Survival, which I would recommend that you read. The man has such a beautiful and honest way of exploring, issues in regard to his own eating disorder and how this self-reflective journey that he's been on has helped him overcome certain issues. So check out that book. I'll ping it up there. I've always wanted to do that. That's going to look great. But yeah, enjoy the conversation and comment, like and share and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you really want to. That would be fab.
Whoa, man!
And with yours, orthorexia, that was something I'd never heard of. And I think when people think about eating disorders, you maybe go to the main ones that might be anorexia or bulimia, but people don't realize the wide spectrum of disorders that can kind of come underneath eating disorders. So if you do want to just kind of take us through just what orthorexia is, how you came about your diagnosis, and just a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I was in the same boat. I had no idea what orthorexia was until I was months into my own treatment and recovery process. I was originally diagnosed with an unspecified eating disorder, which kind of left me thinking maybe it's not that serious. It kind of felt like other or on a survey or a question form. So I'm reading a book one day in recovery and I come across this term orthorexia. And I'm like, what in the world does this mean? So I do the natural thing and I Google it, and it comes back and it says this unhealthy obsession or addiction to healthy, clean eating. And that is when the light bulb went off. That is when I realized exactly what I had been facing and what this eating disorder looked like. So essentially, what I was doing was taking all of these different food rules that exist from the various fad diets out there and kind of morphing them in, molding them into this perfect diet that I thought was going to give me total health and longevity and that made me better than other people. I would look at others and say they weren't taking as good a care of their body as I was. So it was this fixation with just healthy, clean eating, working out all the time, just doing everything I thought I could to improve my physical health. Sadly, I didn't realize the toll that it was taking on my mental health, on my emotional health, on my social health. And it basically got to the point where it was holding me hostage. My entire life, my entire identity, I thought, was based around this healthy, clean lifestyle that I was doing, whether it was eating or being in the gym.
Particularly with that notion, again, just going back to healthy eating and it being an eating disorder around healthy eating, what within that, what does it mean when you say eating healthily can be unhealthy? Because it feels like quite a juxtaposition of the two, and I think it's interesting to kind of understand what that actually means.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind right away is I like to say that I was living in healthified hell, where I was taking every recipe out there and substituting things to try to make it healthier. And one of the things was cauliflower crust pizza. And now I realize that there's some individuals out there who do have that health need where they have to stay away from gluten or they have to, eat cauliflower crust pizza. Well, I wasn't one of those people, but I had convinced myself that I needed to do that, that that was the healthy thing to do. And it tasted horrible every single time I ate it. It made me start to not even like pizza, which I thought was pretty impossible. But I would continue to tell myself that this was the healthy thing to do. This was the right thing to do. And this was my life moving forward. I could no longer go back to eating regular crust pizza again. And it was very difficult to find joy in food anymore because, for starters, I was eating the same thing day after day because my list of good foods had gotten so small and my list of bad foods had grown exponentially that food was no longer fun. Food no longer had any excitement around it at all. It just seemed like something I had to do every single day. But I completely lost the joy, the fun part of the eating experience, and that also equates to going out with friends. I would no longer go out and enjoy dinner with friends or go out to family for holidays because I was worried about breaking those food rules. So again, I was missing the fun, the social aspects that our society has around food.
I mean, there's a big signal. If you're starting to go off pizza, there's one alarm bell.
Yeah. I am very glad to have regular crust pizza. That's actually what I'm having for dinner tonight. So yeah, that is
You're
good to have
living
it
the
back.
dream. But with not going out to as many social situations, did your friends, families notice these, signals of like, oh, he's not coming out as much, or was it gradual to a point that it was like so subtle that it was over a long space of time that they didn't recognize it?
Yeah, so it was pretty gradual. I would say I fought the condition for well over 10 years. So it was just a kind of a slow drip and it happened over time. And unfortunately, again, going back to diet culture, we so often praise individuals when they're eating healthy or they're dieting and exercising all the time. So if anything, my friends and family were admiring my dedication and my commitment to the different dieting programs that I would be on. So there were never really any concerns. Nobody was ever raising the red flag. And I think also some of it has to do with the lack of knowledge or awareness around orthorexia because we never think that somebody who just wants to eat healthy or go to the gym all the time could be battling an eating disorder. And also, as a guy, people don't really think about guys getting eating disorders. So again, my friends and my family weren't suspicious about anything. So I think it came as a complete surprise when I would come out and tell them about the battle that I've been going through for so long.
That's interesting as well. Just that notion that how hard it is to maybe see signs that somebody's going through an eating disorder, wherein they perceive diet in a way that they're commending you on. Oh, well, good for him for committing to not coming out or to eating these healthy foods. That that stigma around diet culture kind of stifles the progression in being able to read signals or signs, I suppose. And within that, I think it's one of those things where I think we're all guilty of being driven into a space where we've picked up falsities and falsehoods with what diet culture can do for us, and the damage it can do as well particularly when you reflect so much on yourself in regards to how your body looks or how you feel in your body, that it's easy to kind of just follow this mainstream narrative of what diet means and what diet culture is.
prior to coming to terms with my eating disorder, when I would see a friend and if they had lost weight, that would be the first compliment I would make to them is, "Oh, you're looking great right now." But you never really know the context that's going on. So we have to stop just looking at the physical aspects of things and praise our friends on other things that we see them accomplishing in their life. I don't know if I've ever had somebody say, "Oh, well, you're doing great. Thank you for opening up and being vulnerable with me today." Nobody ever praises that. But as soon as somebody loses some weight, they're all about the praise. And for me, I thrived on that. I had such a low level of self compassion and self love for myself that when others would compliment me on my dieting or compliment me on a weight loss, it made me feel really good. And I wanted more of that. And I think that's kind of what continued to drive me further and further to rock bottom with orthorexia.
And what was that rock bottom? You know, what was that moment where a switch flicked and, you know, you realized, right, this is taking its toll?
Yeah, so it was the infamous PETA incident. And it was Independence Day weekend here in the United States. And my husband and I had gone out of town for a couple of days. And this was in the middle of the pandemic. So we were just trying to get away to relax and unwind. And vacations are very difficult for me because I was leaving my routines and my regimens. So there was this overwhelming fear that I was going to break a food rule or stray from what I had been taught. And I finally found a restaurant after searching for a couple of hours. And we go out to the restaurant. I order the pita and hummus platter because I thought that's all that I could have on the menu, or at least that's what orthorexia was telling me. And then I'm like, well, I have to substitute the pita for fresh vegetables because carbohydrates are evil. I can't have those. So I asked the waiter, and unfortunately, he was unable to do that. They didn't have any fresh vegetables. And it was in that moment that I started crying and that I got angry and aggressive, and I was just done. I was done with the trip. I was done with the restaurant, and I got very just emotional towards my husband. And at that moment, he said he was concerned about my eating habits. He was concerned about this unresolved pain he saw inside. He was concerned about the anxiety that I was dealing with. And those words opened my eyes. It made me realize that I didn't want to live like this anymore. I didn't want to be this negative, angry person. I didn't want to live with these food rules anymore. And it would be that experience that, finally crashed me into rock bottom and allowed me to ask for help.
And within that, how did it make you feel when your husband recognized that within you and kind of not called you out, but made you aware of the anger and the frustration that you were feeling?
Yeah, it was so many emotions. It was like a fire hydrant being released, and just all these emotions coming out everywhere. There was part of me that was embarrassed. It was very embarrassing to admit that I needed help. That was very hard to do, and I think a lot of that is how men are conditioned. It's hard for us to ask for help. There was also relief because I was like, okay, there is something going on. I think maybe in the back of my mind there had been some suspicions, but then as soon as I heard somebody else validate it, I realized that, okay, there is something going on, and maybe now I can finally get help and I don't have to live like this anymore. So there was a very big mix of emotions. I would spend the rest of that night pretty much just crying and releasing years of pent up emotions because I had built a wall around me for so long. And I think I had used dieting and exercise as a way to kind of block all that off and numb that as soon as I didn't have that mask to hide behind anymore, just every emotion that I had built up for the last decade or so started rushing out of me.
Yeah, and I can totally relate to that experience as well in regard to that triggering of a certain moment. And mine was during lockdown as well, when I kind of thought my anxiety couldn't get any more heightened And then lockdown happened, and all the coping mechanisms that I had in regards to, going outside, going for a walk, socializing, going for a run was taken away from me. All of a sudden I had nothing, and I was shocked at where my emotions could take me. And similarly, I kind of tried to just push all of that down. And I think it was, a conversation with my mum that I had where she kind of, was just saying, "You're walking around the house like a ghost." I was just kind of walking around unsettled with this pent up energy inside of me. And it was just kind of that, question of like, what are you doing? Like, this doesn't feel normal. That kind of made me think like, oh God, if other people are recognizing it, then maybe, I need to say something, speak about it, or at least try and vocalize it in a way that I can move on, or kind of create a new progression of, right, what's this next iteration of me dealing with my anxiety going to look like?
It's amazing what that objective perspective can do when you hear it from somebody else, or even for me when I was going through treatment and I had to write my story out, and then I read it back to myself, and I realized everything that had been going on. But I think when you're in the middle of a storm, sometimes it's very hard for us to see what's actually happening to us. So it takes somebody else speaking up and saying it to kind of make us realize what's truly going on.
And like you said, particularly as a guy as well, naturally, we aren't adverse to, we kind of want to hunker down and hold it in and create, feel stoic in ourselves that we can deal with it on our own. We don't need anyone else. I've got this. And, that combined with, again, going back to diet culture and the stigma around eating disorders, that's just kind of another level of, having conversations that males can approach in regard to diet culture, eating disorders, and creating these safe spaces, or at least having conversations like me and you are having, where you can realize that, these are conversations that men are having and that men can have. And whether or not you feel as though you have an eating disorder, at least you can be privy to the conversations that can then allow you to do your own internal work in your own time, to kind of maybe reflect just that little bit more on, oh, I've heard somebody else talk about this, and that, has maybe triggered a response in me that's made me kind of reflect, oh, there's a certain characteristic that I've recognized from this person that I maybe have, and, lead them on a bit of a path of understanding that, oh, maybe I do have an issue, or maybe this is a conversation I need to have more. And, I just wonder what your views are on how we kind of create a more positive structure for men to talk about eating disorders.
Yeah, so I believe storytelling is the root of all of it. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. When we have the type of conversations that we're having right now, it's going to open the door for other men to have those exact same conversations. For me, one of the things that was so beneficial throughout my entire recovery process was not just working with my therapist or working with a nutritionist, but it was reading other individuals' stories and hearing the struggles that they went through, whether it was eating disorder related or just mental health related, period, or they overcame some sort of trauma in their lives. And through hearing their stories, I better understood my own story, and it made me feel not so alone. And it made me realize that there is strength in vulnerability. So I think it is so important for all men to get out there and to share their stories, because you never know who needs to hear it. And I think that's really how we start to confront this stigma. And like you were mentioning a few minutes ago, sometimes the most important audience we need to talk to is ourselves. So if there's a guy out there listening to this right now who might not feel comfortable yet asking for help externally, start talking to yourself. Start to work on that self-compassion and that self-love, because I think a lot of guys, we've missed that. We lost that somewhere during childhood, where we don't even allow ourselves to love ourselves or show compassion towards ourselves. So if you think that there's something going on, but you're not yet comfortable comfortable enough to share your story with other people, share it to the most important audience you have, yourself, and grow from there. And I think that is really how we open the door to have these types of conversations among us guys.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point as well. And I always kind of describe it as planting seeds, wherein, that seed isn't going to bloom there and then once you have that conversation with somebody or you're privy to a conversation. It might be 2 months, 3 months, a year down the line where something occurs or there's a trigger scenario that then makes you reflect back to a conversation that you once had or a conversation you overheard, that then kind of sparks the waters that maybe allow this seed that's been planted 3 months previous, a year previous, to just kind of start to bloom and think, right, okay, for whatever reason, things are starting to make sense. Something is starting to take shape in my mind. And, and thus the process kind of begins. And, it's such an empowering feeling as well when I think, particularly going back to listening to conversations, and I think I've said this in every talk I think I've had, that I've never came away from a conversation with somebody who has been so honest and open about the trials and tribulations that they've been through and thought, God, that was really heavy, or that was a tough to listen to conversation. It might have been tough, but at the same time, the confidence and bravery to do that has always, been more inspiring than anything else. And, that's one thing I think I constantly try and distill into people is, that it's inspiring to hear people talk, and to get to that point and be able to do it for yourself is such a brave and equally as inspiring thing. And I just wish that for so many men to get to that point, because it is, it's an empowering feeling to have, that you have that voice and you can use that voice for somebody else and yourself.
Yeah, having this conversation today is leaving me feeling inspired and empowered. And I think it's a two-way street of healing, because it's allowing both of us to heal. It's allowing both of us to have this type of connection and conversation today. But then for those people who are listening, it's also allowing them to start on the path for healing. So it's such a cool experience. And it all, like I said, it goes back to storytelling, and it goes back to having these conversations, because you're totally right. I've never left a conversation like this and not felt inspired, or not, thought, oh man, that was a lot. I can't really handle that right now. No, every time it builds me up, and it helps me continue on that healing journey.
Yeah. And, I think it's equally to kind of recognize that, sometimes you build up that fear in your head where you think, oh, I'm about to enter a situation where the conversation's going to be tough and I don't think I'm prepared. But then you get into that conversation, and again, it might be hard if you're in the throes of starting it, but at the same time, no matter how hard or how small these parts of you that you're kind of starting to release are, you can still feel empowered for kind of feeling that, like, well, I'm glad I've just made that step, or I'm glad I've just tried. At least I gave the conversation a go, and it didn't maybe go the way I wanted, but good on me for trying anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I think, the steps that it takes to get to the point that we're at takes a long time, but and it was never this easy, and I was never this happy to talk about it. But you get there by making mistakes and things not going right, and then in discussions where you've tripped up on your words and you've came away from it thinking, well, that just didn't make sense. But
Oh yeah.
but you get there.
Yeah, I've had plenty of those experiences, along the way. And it's one of those things where, failure is part of the process. Today's failure can be tomorrow's success. So you're always going to fall down sometimes along the way, but you get there. And I think it goes back to stepping outside of your comfort zone. I like to say that when I lived in my comfort zone, that is where my eating disorder thrived. That's where my anxiety and my OCD thrived. But as soon as I started stepping out, that's when I began to thrive. Now, stepping out of a comfort zone does not mean everything's going to be great right off the bat. There is going to be those growing pains, and it's going to be really tough at times, but it's totally worth it. So just keep pushing forward, learn from those mistakes, learn from those tough times. One thing I like to say about my recovery is that there are no bad days. There's good days and there's learning days. And I think the same thing can apply to anybody who's trying to start this process of sharing their story or asking for help. There's going to be good days and there's going to be those tough days, but those tough days are the ones that you can learn the most from. So every time you do stumble, just pick yourself back up and keep going, learn from that experience.
Yeah, and even now, I still learn, and you might have had similar scenarios where you think you've got all the answers you think you've been asked all the questions that you're going to get asked sometimes, and somebody comes along, or maybe you're talking to somebody, or you're giving a talk, because I know you go to universities and do talks as well, and somebody asks a question and you kind of met with, oh, I don't really have an answer for that, or no one's ever asked me that before, and in that moment, I've found it, it's easy to just say, I don't have an answer for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first time I've been asked that question, and to not panic and to not try and find the words, and just be confident in admitting that's something I'm going to have to think about, and I'll figure that out for myself. But right now, don't have the words for it.
Yeah, being able to say I don't know is a very empowering thing. And that is something that I have just finally learned in the last couple months even, because up until then, I thought I knew everything. It's one of those things where I hated to say I don't know, but now I realize it's the smartest thing to do sometimes.
Completely. And, I kind of, as we've talked, I love that we've kind of came to that point there, because I think that's again something I've learned recently, and something I haven't spoke about enough in regard to just saying I don't know. It's and the same goes for when people are trying to get into the smaller conversations of discussing their own mental health, and having somebody come up to them and just say, how are you feeling, what's going on in your head. It's okay to get to that spot and just kind of say, I'm not feeling great. I'm not sure what that means. I can't articulate that, but I just want you to know that I don't feel right.
One of the best things I did was I was part of a men's group a couple months ago, and we would do a check-in at the beginning of every session, and we were supposed to say how we were feeling, but we weren't allowed to justify it or explain it in any way. All we could say was that emotion, or if we were having a good day or a bad day. That was it. We couldn't explain why. And I think that was so empowering, because for so long I always felt the need to justify why I was feeling this way. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't justify why you're feeling that way. You're just feeling that way because you're a human being, and that's normal. So I think it's so important for all of us to keep that in mind, that if you're not okay, you don't have to go any farther than that. All you've got to say is, I'm not doing okay right now. You don't owe anybody an explanation.
Oh, man.
I do just want to loop back to your mental health journey, and I was reading one of your blogs, and you spoke about a moment where I think you were talking with your husband, and you said that you didn't feel worth the money or the time to kind of go through the process of mental health therapy. What was that moment like, to kind of feel like that, and how did you overcome that moment?
Yeah, so I think I ran into the same situations that a lot of people are running into right now, that it was actually easier for me to ask for help than it was to find help. Mental health resources are so limited, and they're so hard to find sometimes, and especially for men. When it comes to eating disorders, I feel like we're kind of forgotten about sometimes, and it got to me in those early days of recovery, and it made me feel like I wasn't worthy enough for treatment, I wasn't sick enough for treatment, and that I wasn't strong enough for the recovery process. I had a total lack of self-compassion for myself, and I didn't think I was strong enough to actually go through healing and go through recovery. And that conversation occurred right around the time that I was about to meet with my therapist. And I was filling out the intake form. And one of the sections on the intake form asked what my strengths were. And I left it blank because I couldn't recognize any strengths within myself at that point. And it made me think that I was never going to be able to climb the mountain of recovery because I found myself looking up at what felt like an impossible climb, and I didn't even know where to start. And that was a very hard conversation for me to have. But then when he turned around and he basically said, "You are worth it," and that was it. There was nothing else. It was just, "You are worth it." And that is what I needed to hear because I wasn't giving myself that compassion. So I needed somebody else to give me that compassion. And that alone made me realize that I was worth it and that I am enough.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's tends to be the smallest and simplest things that people say to you that give you the motivation to pursue your mental health journey or to continue into it. Because I remember in therapy where it was the first time I think ever really, or that I was open to consider, where someone told me that the flurry of emotions, thoughts, and feelings that that I had going on in my head due to how my anxiety made me feel, you know, that's normal, and it's okay to feel like that, and you aren't an abnormal person for feeling those emotions. And I remember being in my therapy session, just kind of having this overwhelming feeling just go through me of, oh my God, like there's a weight. I feel validated in my emotions, and I'm not nuts. I'm not a crazy person. I'm just a normal person who's going through a tough time.
Right. Yeah, that is the most liberating feeling when that rushes over you because for so long all you can keep thinking is what's wrong with me? What am I
Yeah,
doing wrong? And then you realize I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just going through a tough time right now. And that to me is one of the most alive feelings you can experience when you finally accept that.
completely. I mean, God, as I say, I just remember kind of coming off that session and thinking something's changed. Somebody's seen me. And you never get an experience like you do in therapy as well. How often do you get the space to just be free to speak your mind and to be as open as that with anyone? Because I think you maybe come away from therapy and you still put back on parts of your mask that you're trying to kind of take off. There's still, at least for me anyway, still worries in regards to, can I be this open with everyone else? And, it's, those walls come up and come down just as quickly sometimes. But again, it's just a process that we all go through. And therapy, I think therapy in its essence isn't something that is discussed enough as well in regard to, actual lived experience versus what you assume therapy is going to be like. I mean, I remember going into my first session and kind of being totally blind or blank with like, what's this? What do they want me to say? What do they want me to do? What threads do I think I should pull at? Like, what am I coming at them with? And just kind of going there and just word vomit after word vomit, well, I think it's my anxiety is caused by this, and I think this, and I think that. And I got to the end of the session and I was just kind of like, right, for this hour-long period, I'm pretty sure I've just word vomited onto a page. Like, is that help at all? You know what I mean? Is that, and it's a two-way street, for me anyway, it was kind of like, I realized that I've got the tools and the conversations that I want to have. I can say what I want to say and I'm there to say it. And they're there as kind of a guide to just kind of keep me on a path and to keep me in a space where they assume, well, that seemed like an interesting topic. Maybe you want to talk about that more. But you have all the words and all the things that you want to say inside. And, to go into a session and just word vomit onto a page, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
completely okay.
It it is, and I love that word, a guide, because I think oftentimes, and I was guilty of this too. People assume that you go to therapy and they're going to tell you what to do. They'll say, okay, X Y Z, do this, do that. They'll ask you specific questions and want an answer for it, and that is not what it's like. They're guiding you. If anything, you're the one in charge. They might be the professional, but it's your words that are going to guide that session.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really cool way to look at it, because that's exactly what it is. And oftentimes through my therapy appointments, I recognize things that I didn't even know were wrong. I recognize issues that I hadn't worked through, that I didn't even realize I had in the first place. And most of the time, it's just because, like you said, I'm word vomiting. I'm getting it all out there. And my therapist is simply just kind of guiding me to those answers and guiding me to the issues that I need to address.
Whoa, man.
And I kind of want to loop back to eating disorders and social media, and just kind of like the part that plays in men's perceptions of themselves. Because I think in relation to body image as a possible catalyst for that, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm still new to the discussions around eating disorders and how they can manifest. But I think there is a huge issue around men's perceptions of their own bodies that I feel like that isn't talked about enough. I see a lot of conversations around women, and how it's like, embrace your body, embrace like your bigger thighs, or like your rolls and love handles and all of this, and every part of your body, embrace it, get to know your body. But there isn't a lot of discussion around that for men. And I know personally that I've had a lot of issues with my body in regard to, I've always wanted to be a big muscular guy. I wanted to be built like a bear at one point, and I hated being skinny, hated it so much. And I was in the gym and I was taking all the protein shakes and eating chicken and broccoli and all of this, and was getting nowhere with it. And I was like, why can't I just be big? And I hated being skinny. And I wasn't unfit either. I was into athletics. I had a good body, but I wanted more. I wanted to be bigger. And you can't see yourself for the person that you are. I feel like I didn't have that love and that self-compassion for, you are okay. You look great as you are. Don't, pursue a body type that doesn't fit who you are as a person. Doesn't fit your genetics as a person. Sometimes you have a goal, but you might not be able to get there. If I say I'm looking at Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, I don't think I can physically get to that point, no matter how hard I tried. But you can fall into those misconceptions of, but if I try hard enough, if I eat right, if I keep pushing, I'll reach it, I'll get there. And, it took me a while to kind of realize that, well, that just isn't the case.
Right. Oh, totally, totally. I relate to everything you were just saying, because that's exactly what I was doing too. I was spending so much time in the gym, and I ate so much damn protein that it was like, how can I get bigger? How can I get these muscles? Because we've idealized that as a society for men, that we're supposed to be muscular, and we're supposed to, have that rippling six pack and those bulging biceps and all of that. And for me, it's difficult because I watch a lot of sports too. So I'm constantly subjected to all of these ultra athletes who, that is their lives. They've dedicated themselves and they've got this genetic makeup to be athletes like that. And it's hard because I oftentimes compare myself to them, and it's like, well, why can't I look like that? And I think comparison is another thing that a lot of us guys have, because we all want to be the alpha. We all want to be, the leader of the pack. And oftentimes, again, the leader of the pack's supposed to be that muscular guy. And we're just not having those types of conversations. When we go online right now, and I'm sure you see the same things that I do, even if you look up like the hashtag men's mental health on Instagram, half of the posts are all of these guys in the gym with their shirts off, and these bulging pecs and the six packs and stuff. And it's like, okay, that's not really mental health. That's not
Mm.
doing a lot of help for those of us out there who are comparing ourselves to what we're seeing. And I think for so long there's kind of that Barbie complex that exists for women, but there's also this complex that exists for men, but we're just not having that type of conversation. A lot of it probably boils down to the fact that men aren't supposed to talk about our insecurities. If we're insecure about something, that's a sign of weakness, or so we're taught even at a young age as boys. And it's okay to feel insecure about your body. It's okay to wake up in the mirror and not always like what you see, but it's different if you can at least accept it. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of men have to do, is start to be able to just accept themselves for who they are and realize that, okay, I'm never going to be an Olympian athlete or anything like that. I'm never going to look like The Rock. But I can still have a body that can do some amazing things. I love to climb. I love to play tennis. I love to go hiking. My body enables me to do all of that. So why do I need to have a six pack, or why do I have to have the biggest biceps if I can do the things I already enjoy to do?
And what were, some of the processes that you personally went through in order to start to love your body?
Mhm. Yeah, well, to be honest, there are still days that I wake up and I don't love my body, and I think that that is something that I continue to work through. But one thing that I do every single day is I thank at least one part of my body for what it can do, not what it looks like, but for what it can do for me. So even if it's thank you to my hand today for allowing me to write that blog post, or thank you to my legs for letting me go hiking today. I just thank my body for what it can do rather than what it looks like. And that is helping me accept it and learn to love it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. It's, people talk about gratitude. It's having gratitude. We all have gratitude for nature and the world around us and what it can provide. But, it's important to have that gratitude for yourself as well, like all the stuff you've been through, all the things you've done, and in particular, what your body can cope with and put you through and take you through. And again, mentally as well, that gratitude for moments where you are back at a low point, but just kind of remembering that, I've got a powerful brain that has allowed me to get over a moment similar before, and I can do it again, and I will continue to do it again. Because again, that whole, kind of almost coming full circle, you need to remind yourself that, you've been through bad times before and you can get through them again. Because when you're in that moment and you hit another rock bottom, or what you feel is the lowest low, you need to remind yourself that this isn't your first rodeo. You've done this before and you can do it again. You've got the minerals in you, you've got the body, you've got the mind. Let's go. And, you've got the power. And, it's nice to remind yourself of that.
It is. And that's one thing I was always concerned that, I was one day away from complete relapse, or giving up everything that I've worked for in my eating disorder recovery. And my therapist reminded me that no matter what happens tomorrow, nobody can take away the progress that I've already made. Even if I do crash into rock bottom tomorrow, I've got the last 2 years of hard work that I've put in under my belt that nobody can ever take away from me. So I think that's important to remember, is just because you've braved one storm and suddenly you find yourself in another, nobody can take away the work that you did to get out of that first storm.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful, thing to hear, and a realization to get to. I know we're getting up to the 50-minute mark now while we've been talking, and I'm always aware of time and I don't want things to go too over. So I do just kind of want to bring it back down to like a nice little happy place and a nice little question to kind of finish with. And this is new. I've not done this before, but I've just kind of thought of it as we've been talking. I thought this would be a nice question to ask and a nice conversation to finish with.
All right, bring it on.
What was the last moment for you where you felt proud of yourself?
Ooh, That is a really good question, and I would say it came really recently at a talk that I did with the Oklahoma Eating Disorder Association, and I was asked to be the keynote speaker at their annual gala event. And after I got done talking, everybody stood up and gave me a round of applause and a standing ovation. And then I had several people come and thank me for being there and let me know that my story made them not feel so alone, and that hearing my story made them realize that, what they were going through was valid as well. And that was just an unbelievable moment for me. I didn't know how to take all of that praise. I wasn't used to, people standing up and clapping for me, or people coming up to me and personally thanking me for embracing vulnerability and for sharing my story. And I just remember the whole drive home then. I was just filled with pride of what I've been able to accomplish now, with launching the blog and publishing the book and all of that work. And I always try to remind myself that I'm never going to be able to change the whole world at one time. But if I can change just one person's world at a time, then it's totally worth it. And that night, I felt like I did that, and that was definitely a moment of pride for me.
Well, you definitely deserve that applause, man, because you can tell you've put in the work, your persistence to keep writing blogs, to keep talking on the subject, to reach as many people as you can. It's you should be praised. It's deserved. Like, I think you're a great advocate for male mental health in all its umbrella terms. I think you're a great guy, and I've appreciated speaking to you today. And like we said before, like, I'm definitely going to come away from this feeling empowered and positive, because it's been a beautiful conversation. So thank you so much, Jason.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate this platform that you have in the work that you're doing to enable other guys to share our stories, as well as learning more about your story. It's an empowering tool, and keep up all the work that you're doing. And I'm so glad that we were able to connect today and have this conversation.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I hope we speak again soon, because it's been a great conversation.